with Ohio EPA. He's been with Ohio EPA for about 4 years now. Prior to that, he had lengthy service with a number of state agencies, all dealing with stormwater and stormwater-related construction practices. So, everyone, join me in welcoming Justin Reinhart.
Okay, good morning, everyone. One second. Be up and running here. What a perfect day to talk about stormwater. I rapidly get out of my area of expertise when we start to get more into the regulatory elements, and it's unavoidable that those two worlds have to combine. I'm an engineer by background, and my interest is more in the design and construction, and not so much the administering the regulations and some of the bureaucracy that comes with the permit. But they're so intertwined. I'm happy to help answer any questions as you go along. Just raise your hand, and we'll try and get to them. We could talk about this in the construction, stormwater, general permit, and post-construction, and this stuff probably for days on end, and not get through all the details. I know there were several hands of folks that were new to this world. A lot of opportunities come about locally, statewide, to learn the topic and maybe dive deeper into specific topics, and you'll have to take advantage of those. We'll talk today just focusing on the stormwater active construction components, sediment and erosion controls. And even at that, can't and probably don't have time to cover all of it. I'll start just with a quick intro to all the different abbreviations and jargon. Sometimes in our worlds, we like to use these and throw these out and forget that people don't know them, and I've caught myself a few times having to jot things down. So these are up here for the presentation. I won't read through them, but I want to make sure everybody is on the same page here as we move forward. I want to start out by just looking at the permit in general and kind of painting a picture that we have one general permit for construction activities that covers the states, renewed every 5 years. That covers almost 7,500 projects over the course of this year. Now, some of those are sort of intertwined. As you see, the acreage of a particular project is down to 0.01 to almost to over 6,000 acres on an individual NOI. So that is a broad general permit. You talk about general. It's trying to cover a lot of stuff in one, I think it's 70-page document. So this presents quite a bit of a challenge to fit everything into a discussion to say this is how it should be done when you have one permit that's trying to cover all this material and all of these different projects that are trying to be funneled through it, from large industrial and commercial projects to residential projects, multifamily, single family. In the Columbus area, we have a huge run on the mixed use, the multifamily, the residential 4-story, retail, highway, transportation projects, utility projects. All that gets kind of funneled through one permit. So it's very difficult to talk in specifics and generalities at the same time. So I just want to bring that up and call that to your attention as we go through here. The permit threshold is 1 acre, but you see that hundredth of an acre there, because I think most of those are individual lot permits, as well as common plan and development that may have smaller acreages encapsulated into one. Okay, so with that thought in mind, I want to also go over a little bit of a bigger overview, and I like to generally start out with this discussion. I'll skip through it relatively fast here, but these things aren't really listed in the permit anywhere, but are all things that the SWPPP, or the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, should really entail to be effective and useful and correct. The only one I'll focus on is process-oriented. And as I started to think through that a little bit and trying to figure out how to explain it, I thought I need to look up maybe I can look up a definition of what that means, since I wrote it up there on the slide. And I ended up coming across this on some website here that I've linked up there, but I don't even know if I know what it means exactly if you read through it here, but it's quite lengthy. But it really hit on a couple of key parts that I was trying to explain, or what I meant by a process oriented, the SWPP being process oriented, and that is, stepping through a process sequence while ensuring that every element of the sequence generates the desired interim results, contributing to overall success. So, it's a kind of a chain reaction, a step-by-step approach, which is really what the SWPP is, and that's something I just want to emphasize. This is authorizing construction activity. Activity isn't static. It changes throughout the course of a project, whatever that may be. So I want to emphasize that's something we have to keep in mind when we're looking at the SWPPs. And I like this picture too. I have to always kind of set the stage with like the gloom and doom almost. I hope you can see it there with the lighting, but it's a good representation of why the SWPP is sort of a one chance type thing. This was probably a little swale that came through there and started to erode, and it clearly got away from the contractor. You can see that they had some seeding, I don't know if that's permanent or temporary down there. At one point dumped a bunch of rock in there to try and fix this, and that just unzipped. And now we've got a almost unfixable giant gully that's carving through that site. And at this point, it's going to be very difficult to fix, very problematic. So it kind of highlights the fact that the SWPP needs to get everything right up front to prevent this, because on the back end, the consultants are usually not involved at this point. Now the contractor's trying to fix something or come up with a solution, and it can be problematic and challenging. There may be enforcement issues. So the more we can handle on the front end, the better. So I want to just kind of paint those two thoughts in your head as far as the SWPP before we get into any details. The one thing that's new, the only thing that's really new, I know everybody likes to hear the discussion on what might have changed, is in our MS4 permit, or small MS4 permit. So how many of you are working or operating under a small MS4 permit here representing MS4? So about half of you. Okay, and the rest would be on the consultant contracting side? Okay. So we have the small MS4 permit, and just one excerpt out of it is, as far as the new changes goes from the current permit, was that we required that the reviews follow an objective tool, and to clarify that, I guess it's such a software checklist. So a sort of attempt to formalize the review of SWPPs that come in the office under the MS4 permit. It doesn't say exactly what that has to be. There's some proprietary software that is probably out there. You can devise your own version of it, but the element here is to make sure that we have a sort of a consistent process. I'm sure the consultants will appreciate that each review is done on a consistent basis. From our end, it's documented and on paper, and helps the paper trail through the process. So that's the only thing that's really new. So when we talk about checklist, we have one, and I'll show it to you here in a second, and that was sort of what I was asked to talk to you mostly about. But let's dive back into the SWPPs, the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plans. And I sort of like to start at the top, at the higher level, like I said, a little maybe philosophical, and then work through this into the details. But what should be in a SWPP, or what is a SWPP when we're reviewing it or we're assembling it? What does it need to cover? What does it need to have in it? That was sort of the primary question, I guess you might say, I was asked to answer. And these are all just quotes out of the construction general permit. I don't want to read a bunch of permit language to you. That won't be very fun. But highlighted some of the key points. Again, addressing all phases of construction, that's a point I want to sort of highlight. So we have phasing of construction, be it spatially, be it sequentially or chronologically. Identify the pollution sources. So what a lot of times in a lot of these, 9 out of 10 projects, it's going to be fairly straightforward and standard. But from time to time, you may see things that are out of the ordinary, that take a little exceptional or special thought. Like I said, every one of these projects of various sizes is being funneled through one permit. So you don't know what you'll get into when it comes to potential pollutants, but for the most part, those are pretty simple, common sense things you'll think of that are going right through your head right now. Trash, sediment during construction. Then we get into the practices. So once we've identified, okay, what are the potential problems that might occur on this site? How do we address that in advance? So what are the practices, the BMPs that we might utilize or employ? Put them in the SWP so they're in the right place at the right time and designed properly. And then lastly, there's a whole number of items that work you through this process here that are in the permit that compromise what the content should be. Okay, and those are in part 3G of the permit that I pointed to earlier. And there's 2 sections in here. If you look through it, you'll see a listing in part G1 that talks about a site description and a site map and goes through a whole bunch of content items that are required. And sort of reminds me of a very simplistic early day version of a SWP where there's a drawing. I can almost vision something on the back of a napkin saying here's where the building's gonna go, and here's where silt fence is gonna go, and here's where the sediment basin's gonna go. And then the narrative part of it, so the written out part of describing what these different tools are gonna be and what the project is and when it's gonna be built and all that kind of stuff. So you have that sort of set up in the permit, and all these items are listed. And now that we went through several generations, things have been sort of added in there, and it's a little bit of a mishmash of items that are listed in that part G1. But that's really the contents, each specific item that needs to be in the permit or in the SWP. And then you have part G2, and those are the details on the practices. What they need to be, when to use them, where to use them, how to use them, and not just sediment control, but our erosion controls, preservation practices, so trying to just pull back from even causing a problem in the first place, surface water protection, and then we go through maintenance and inspection of all these practices during the construction process. So that's sort of the structure of the permit, how it's all lined up, and I just want to point that out to you because the checklist that we have, which you could use, and I know a number of communities have suggested or even required that it be included with a SWP to help the review process. And it is thorough. The checklist is basically a reproduction of the permit, you might say, just sort of itemized. And so it's complete, but moving back to what I said earlier, that can be a challenge. It's very hard for us to assemble one document that's going to cover all these different types of projects. It either becomes very cumbersome and very large, and you'll say half these things don't apply to me, or we boil it down and make it very straightforward and simple for everyone to use, but then we might miss key parts that are less common. So it's sort of, from my point of view, it's a little bit of a challenge there it's this constant fight to be simple and useful, yet thorough and complete. And I think the agency where I'm at and the way we work, and a lot of us that are in a more of a litigious world always gravitate towards that, well, let's be thorough and complete because we'll get burned some way. So we end up with a lengthy 10-page document that can be cumbersome. The first 2 pages of it, if you look at the spreadsheet or the checklist, cover that content, that part G1 items in the permit. And it just goes through line by line. And all these things are really, as you're working through the review of a SWP or assembling it, there are a couple in there that are maybe a little project dependent, but for the most part, they're all required. They all should be answered yes or not applicable. And for the most part, almost all of them are items that need to be in a SWP for various reasons. So I just kind of went through that to demonstrate that. we won't go through these questions line by line. If you had specific questions or have one on any of the contents, please let me know. I can help clarify them. I know some of them, as I read through them, because they just regurgitate the permit, a lot of the questions are a little confusing as to what they're getting at. In the G2 part, or all of the practice-specific information, is the rest of for the most part, the rest of the checklist, all puzzled in there in an itemized fashion. Now, if you go through this part, it gets a little more complex to review a project, because some of the questions or some of the material is fairly mandatory. Every project should follow, and others are a little bit more evaluative in that you have to sort of think, well, did they implement this properly, or is it required, or should it be required, or is it in the right place? So you have more of an evaluative thought process, and it doesn't fit well to a checklist. It's sort of an opinion. It's like, yes, I believe this is good. No, I don't think this is good. Or is it included but could be better? So I highlighted some of these here in yellow, and I know you can't read it, but just to sort of highlight how these type of questions sort of get intermixed in these items that you have to have, and these items that you may or may not have to have, or you may have to have in a certain way depending on something in the project. So keep that in mind as we're going through this. I'll talk at the end. I'm hoping to revisit this whole checklist and come up with a little bit better version of it. What I'd like to do now is switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about just some specific items that should be in a SWP and discuss them. I think they're the more important items to me. And again, if you have questions on anything that I haven't covered, just shout. So I touched on the theme of the sequence and the phasing and this sort of time dependency of a project. And so to me, the SWP really starts with the construction sequencing, and a lot of times we term that as the construction schedule. That's not so much the important part. We're not really concerned about whether the utilities are going in before the roads are going before the utilities, and so forth. I think most projects follow a pretty logical sequence of grading utilities, structural, final grading, and whatnot. In most residential areas start with work way spatially through a phased approach. So that's pretty standard, but the important part there is at what point and when should practices be implemented throughout the life of a project. Now, many of these projects are going to be 6 months or less of construction. Things are going to go in, project gets built, and then BMPs are removed. So that a lot of projects that's fairly simple, but others are more complex, and they may span a year, 2 years, multiple seasons. So there needs to be some thought put into when and how those practices should be installed and inspected. So I pull the schedule out here. As far as a sample SWP goes, or template, I get that question a lot, and we haven't put one together, mostly because I think that, like I said, it's just too hard to put it all into one document. Say everything should look like this, because it really shouldn't. They're all different. And even not from our end, all the ones I see, each consultant has things that they like to do a little differently. Each MS4 has things that they want to see, or maybe they have local regulations that they want to include in the SWP. So it's hard for us to put a generic version together, but US EPA does have a couple of templates that you might be interested in. This is a schedule that I took from their sample SWP that sort of highlights the connection of, okay, what's the process, the construction process, and then what are the logical BMPs that go along with it. So then it gives some semblance of timing, when things should be in. I tied back all these little requirements to the actual permit itself, so you see the numbers in there. If you're curious where it comes from, you can backtrack and tie this all together in the spreadsheet based on the permit part numbers. I don't want to read through that and make this too boring of a presentation. It's probably trending on the boring already, but I want to just note that those are there, so you don't think that I'm creating new requirements just on a whim here, but each of those are in there. And as you see, that theme again of timing is very important. So whether it's detailed, like the requirement to have a sediment basin on the front end of a project, or just the general discussion about employing BMPs at the right time. So a schedule of BMP, I want you to think of this more as a schedule of BMP implementation, not construction activities. We're not telling you how to build it and what order to build it, so much as when you get to this phase, what are you putting in BMP wise? Okay, that theme ties to the rest of the SWP too, especially the drawings. I think as an engineer, we tend to gravitate to the drawings. When I get a SWP to look at or a question, I jump straight to the plans, and that's my go-to place. I love to put them together. The specs and the narrative is the part that I always kind of toss to the side too. It's important though. There's a lot of information that really need to be one and the same. But when we look at the drawings, the important part there is that it's sequential. So we need to see what's happening at step one of that project. Before the first piece of equipment arrives, where's water going? When they start to do clearing and grubbing work, mass grading work, what's happening? That's when some research shows a large amount of sediment loss occurs, that initial disturbance phase. So our SWP should specify we got the right controls in right there on day one, and addressing water where it's going. A lot of our work ends up moving where that water goes in the grading work we do, and then eventually the storm sewer installation. So now all of a sudden our BMPs may not be active. Just example drawings there. You have a relatively simple site where water is leaving the property in 3 different locations, eventually all to be collected in one, work through one sewer system, one sediment or post-construction basin system, and out one outlet. And that's all fine, but you've got things going different places. So we have to make sure that the BMPs, based on when and where that water is going, are in the right place. And I think it's easiest and best to show that in multiple steps, multiple drawings. So existing proposed contours, existing proposed watersheds, how much water is going in what direction, and where and how those BMPs are going to be used according to that. So that's one of the requirements in the SWP, and one of the things I want you to think about as you're reviewing and preparing them. Along those lines, there may be BMPs that are temporary. Most all of them, really all of our sediment and erosion control BMPs, until you get to permanent stabilization, are temporary by nature. So we think of them maybe as temporary throughout active construction, but it may be just through a particular phase. So this drawing shows a little bit of a diversion channel that's built in through the cul-de-sac area. Clearly not going to last long, but is installed to move water until it's redirected through the storm sewer system, catch basins, and grading. So that's hard to demonstrate in one drawing, and without seeing that initial phase of construction. What's the ground going to look like during grading? On the right, I pulled a series of drawings together I think it was from a different state that had a sort of some sample SWPs, and thought that was kind of an interesting layout, just to show probably at a minimum. I mean, most sites have an initial site plan, which is a great place to put a lot of the site data that's used to assess the whole site in general, things like soils, existing contours, topography. Moving to the grading plan, so those first phases of construction, we're doing a lot of earth moving, very susceptible to erosion and sediment loss. Water going a lot of different directions. So what's that site going to look like then when your inspector's out there? And then the final plan. So, and that's of course what your client's mostly interested in what's the buildings look like, where are they at, where the sewers go, what's the grades, what's the post-construction BMPs, and all those are in place at the very end of the project. So I think almost, it seems like most projects seem to follow along a similar path there of having having those type of drawings in the plan. I just want to emphasize that I know again as an engineer we like to build stuff, so we focus on the sediment basins and maybe some of the other controls, but it's also important to look at the soil retention from a erosion and preservation standpoint. So if we don't erode it, we don't have to worry about capturing it in a BMP. So we'll tie those together here in a second, but key theme is also using the right BMPs in the right place. So I'll emphasize the difference between our sheet flow and concentrated flow controls. So this is pulled out of the permit too, but where we have small areas that are basically just flowing over land, those are the areas we're capturing in a sediment barrier. And anything that becomes unconcentrated, whether it be in a channel or in a very large area, those are going to a sediment pond, and that being a trap or sediment basin. So we have requirements there listed in the permit. We also have the rainwater and land development manual, our stormwater manual that gives guidance on these BMPs as far as the limitations of use on an area basis for silt fence. The question I get is also frequently, maybe I'm sure wondering about, is the sediment barrier. The last permit renewal added the 12-inch sediment barrier. Silt sock is a common, or wattles are common type of barriers. This is something we're working on getting into. The rainwater book doesn't support that at this time. It only talks about silt fencing and compost filter socks, sort of the original version of the sediment sock. Since then, we moved to a lot of other materials being used for those tubes. Hopefully we'll have better technical guidance out on that in the near future. I'm hoping next year we'll be wrapping up a lot of the work to revise and update the rainwater manual and have some of that in there. But the only information we have now is the permit requires that be a 12-inch diameter barrier. So my suggestion, I see a lot of different things being used. My general recommendation is to specify those barriers be silt fence or a 12-inch barrier. And if it's working, that's great. If it's not working, then the contractor is going to have to come up with an equivalent product that works. We don't really have a way to, at this point, to evaluate all those and approve this particular product over another one. So that's not sort of a non-answer, but it's a common question that we're trying to dive into a little bit better answer for you on. And again, maybe the biggest misapplication I see of these barriers is where we have more of a channelized flow. So this can be just a small swale to a ditch or something. Both these sites you can see a heavy amount of flow flowing through there. It's sort of good evidence, the silt fence, at least the picture on the left, that looks like a lot of material that's been collected there and prevented from leaving the site. But you can see on the right too, they've added straw bales, and clearly they're trying to fight something there where the barriers are being overwhelmed. So those are areas where, and you see on the drawing here, it's probably very faint, but there's a dashed dot line indicating a channel through there. So if I see that, there's silt fence crossing a channel, that's problematic. That's where we needed a basin or trap control. There's kind of a picture of what that trap control might look like. Sediment basin with basically more of an informal outlet. We don't see these used a lot unless there's just not a real defined outlet. So sediment trap is just basically that pool that allows sediment to settle out, and usually has that rock outlet type structure. So again, hopefully we'll have these incorporated into the rainwater manual a little bit better explanation of how, where, when to use them. When it comes to the design specifics, I really recommend people look at the new sediment pond spreadsheet tool that we developed. It's up on our website. I can help you navigate through that. The permit currently talks about data sheets, and I haven't seen too many people use those. Those are just sort of forms you could fill out to log your design, and we're moving away from that. But the spreadsheets are a great way to evidence to a reviewer or that you have met all of those design stipulations. And as a reviewer, you can punch those numbers in and check that a sediment basin meets all the different design criteria. The details, we need to have details on all of these practices. The more details are in the plans, from a designer standpoint, the consultant knows exactly what to build, or I should say the contractor knows exactly what to build. The reviewer then has all of the information they know they need to analyze and assess that the practice or a basin meets the requirements. So just pulled a couple things out here. Tables work well, having information in there on the volumes, and we usually don't have a problem with the flow rates, but skimmer sizing type information, the connection, how is this temporary skimmer, temporary outlet going to be configured on a permanent outlet structure? Is it going to require some tricky plumbing, or is it going to be fairly straightforward? Inlet protection, most people are fairly familiar, and it ends up being well used during the construction standpoint. If there's a common question I get on this, it's the requirement for inlets that have a drainage area of 1 acre or more utilizing a sediment basin. And it sort of ties back to, I think, earlier days where people were maybe trying to skirt sediment basin requirements, looking at using just solely inlet protection. And so really, if you have internal areas, the picture on the right is probably more aligned with where you're going to get into this type of situation, where maybe we've got a very large area that's going to one particular inlet to the sewer system that is going to really be overwhelmed using this sort of whatever type of inlet protection, manufactured product or something that's just custom designed here, but that generally is going to be geotextile fabric with limited flow rate, and that sediment's going to build up probably to an unmaintainable level. Not sure if this is much of a problem up this way. I was like, I grew up in Toledo area here, so it's had to go quite a ways to see slopes like this. So I don't know if this is much of an issue, but if you get across embankments, highway embankments, stream embankments, again, those steep slopes are areas that require a little special attention. Making sure that those are called out in advance, that we're going to use controls here, we're going to stabilize these as soon as possible, because I'm sure pretty obvious that they can get away from you pretty quickly once they start to erode. Temporary stabilization. We've got specific requirements for timing of utilizing temporary stabilization in the permit. I'd just like to point out to people that really there's a requirement there to evaluate areas that may, from more spatially, not just timing wise, that may need temporary stabilization. So you may have a project that requires a certain sequence of construction, and something is going to be disturbed and then left alone for a while. Those are areas that we should probably look to call out specifically in the plan, say this area needs to be temporarily stabilized once that grading work is finished. The rest of it gets tied together through a log, so a journal of sorts of grading work that happens. And the point there is to identify in the SWP, both to the contractor and then through inspectors, that we're following those time frames. This area was disturbed, and then it was seeded, or this area was disturbed and disturbed again, and we've not met that kind of threshold for when we should be stabilizing it. So a log should be in the SWP that the contractor can utilize to journalize those grading activities. Like I said, any concentrated flow areas need that. I like this special, it's sort of an odd part of the permit. You undertake special measures, and it's kind of, what exactly is special? I don't know if we can identify it, but these areas, again, can get away from you quickly where you have concentrated flows. You see a swale here that was constructed, rock checks put in, and clearly is eroded, probably because it wasn't seeded right away. So those are those tying it all together, you know, temporary, permanent seeding on these areas that are going to be very erosive. So if they would have gotten probably blanket straw, mulch down, seeding, permanent seeding, rock checks all in place up front, may not have had a problem there. Streams and outfalls as well. So these areas, once head walls put in there, that area should probably be finalized. So those are areas that could be called out on SWPPs to permanently seed once complete. Seasonally, so we need to have guidance on the different times of the year. See, this is the time we see it a lot. Construction is slowing down. And after yesterday's rain, sort of the perfect storm situation. So are we advising contractors on when temporary seeding should take place, and if it doesn't take place, when it's going to germinate and actually be effective, what's plan B? And for most of us, that's starting now through March. Again, I talked about location, so we've got a site here with a basin, again, a cul-de-sac, a swell draining to it along the south boundary. Those areas are likely to be in the early phases of construction to be graded to put in as a sediment basin. Our storm sewers and catch basins all put in. They're going to start to convey water early in the project as those lots get built out. Maybe those are areas that we can call out to be finished in advance, so they're not just left bare. And get those permanently stabilized so that our focus can really change to just looking at each of those little lots. Probably a little short on time to finish to do this in 2 minutes. Okay, I was going to do a little exercise with you. I pulled a drawing out of a SWPP, just a random SWPP that's not from this area, but I thought, well, let's see if we can find some interesting discussion points. And again, it sort of shows the challenges of a lot of things happening. I've got a commercial industrial warehouse, logistics facility of some sort going in. I think it was over at 30 acres. A lot of things come to my attention in looking at this. Again, this is sort of an attempt to do all in one. You see existing contours, some proposed contours up to the north. I've got a basin in, and my construction entrances are listed, but I'm wondering about the area to the right. You've got a lot of this particular site that's not being built on. So what's happening there? Staging area, or is there grading? I imagine that's for future expansion. Is it going to be disturbed in the first place? It looks like their limits go all the way around the property line.
Just to let you know, just try to leave 5 minutes for Q&A.
Yep. Oh, yep. So those are things I look at. That you see there's a ditch going, or a swale drain to the northeast there. There's a wetland actually in the center next to the basement. That's the basin. It's a sensitive area. Maybe we should have silt fence around. The whole area around the basin, if that's going to be built, there's not much going on there. Those areas that we could call out temporary permanent seeding. That probably goes in first, but it looks like all the water goes to the right. So how are we, until the sewer's activated, moving water through the system? I mean, do we need more controls to the right, to that northeast outlet? So those are some of the things that I would be thinking as we go through the SWPP review process. Hope to revise that checklist a little bit for those of you that use it. I'd like to talk to you more and pick your brain maybe a little bit, and some of the things I've been thinking about is working through that, is trying to find a way to make it more usable. Segregate some of these different types of questions, maybe even make it into an Excel type worksheet rather than like a paper form. Something you can use the different tabs and different worksheets to go through. So hopefully maybe you have a chance to talk to you individually a little bit about that, but that's all I had. I feel like there was a lot of information really fast. Sorry, it was a crash course. But questions?
We have about 5 minutes if people have any questions.
Anything not discussed? Any questions on?
I'll just say for the checklist, some of the questions are almost not questions, or it's almost almost, you have to answer yes to this question, or, there's not really room for, a no comment, or, potentially not applicable. So that's one thing, going through the checklist a lot, I read some of these questions and it's like, if I were a design engineer, what the heck? You know what I mean? So, maybe just work on some of the wording and clarity of some of those things in the checklist, I think would go a long way.
Agreed, and that's where I was getting at with trying to differentiate between some of these mandatory items that really should be, yes, these are all included as you're doing a review, and then these more evaluative items that, is it necessary, and if it is it being utilized properly and correctly? And those are somewhat subjective, but trying to segregate those type of questions out, and those, I think that might be helpful. I also like to reorganize the order. I think it goes through permit items, line items, and I'm not sure the best way to do this as far as what I would call logical order. One of it may be construction sequence. Some of it is just logical groupings of things that you might see as you flip through pages of a SWP or through drawing pages, or by type of document. So what would you expect to see in narrative? What would you expect to see in more drawing form? So trying to figure out how to better do that review sheet so that it more follows what would be the thought process in reviewing a SWP or assembling a SWP, rather than just, yep, I got that, yep, I got that, yep, I got that. And then hunting and pecking through pages, which I've had to do. And the consultant gets frustrated because they're like, well, sure, it's on page 45. Oh, I haven't gotten to that one yet, so.
Hey, Justin.
You mentioned a calculator on the web. Do you have an address for that, or was it on the EPA's website or the ODNR?
It's on our website, so if you go to the DSW stormwater.index here from our homepage, that's our stormwater main page,
Yeah.
and there is it's there under tools and spreadsheets, I believe.
Okay.
And I can send me an email if you have problems getting to any of that. Our website's not the most easiest to navigate, and it's been changed on me like everything, so. Okay, any other questions, comments, complaints? All right.
Alrighty, thank you, Justin. Very informative, and if you do get a chance to, I will just say from a personal standpoint, if you do get a chance to check out that sediment basin calculation spreadsheet, it's really, really helpful. So thank you, Ohio EPA, for that. Next up is Lauren Rush with the City of Perrysburg, presenting on local SWP perspectives and sort of what we go through as a local MS4 managers, and sort of taking in everything from the design community and trying to get the best product moving forward. So, Lauren, thank you.
All right, let's see how this works for me.
Should figure itself out. It's just the splitter text.
Yeah.
It's like you're up.
Alright, there you go.
All right, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? You're a little taller than I was. All right, good morning. I'm Lauren Rush. I'm with the City of Perrysburg. I'm going to preface my presentation with, I am not an engineer. I have worked in the stormwater field here in Northwest Ohio between the city of Toledo and the city of Perrysburg for the last 9 years. That means that I have been out doing construction inspections, post-construction inspections, outfall inspections, all of the things out in the field that I get to see the results of these plans, and I also get to review them myself. So I do have a really important job in reviewing these things. A lot of the MS4 managers in the room can kind of feel me on that it is really important that we get good quality plans. So I'm gonna take it back. Why are we here and why do we care? You know, obviously we do our jobs because we're supposed to, right? We need to design our subdivisions, we need to get our building plans put together. But why do we actually care about stormwater? If we don't know where the water on our site is going, number one, we're gonna flood people out. If we don't design our sites appropriately and we pollute our environment, we're not gonna have a good time, right? So if we don't have a good place to live, we don't have water to drink, as we've seen with our algae blooms out in Lake Erie, where we all get our drinking water from. And if we flood people's houses, as you can see in the middle picture, I'm the person in the city of Perrysburg that gets called when that happens. So it's extra important to me to make sure that we can avoid all of those situations as best as possible. Because if we don't have those things, what else matters, right? Does it matter if the building is there? Not really, not if it floods out. All right, so why do local jurisdictions review? As Justin was saying, MS4 is Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Operators. We are our own permitted entities through Ohio EPA. We have to submit our annual reports. We have, at minimum, 6 minimum controls that we have to follow, including outreach and education, public involvement. I lead stream cleanups, and get people out to mark storm drains. We have to inspect construction sites, make sure that post-construction is functioning appropriately in our areas, and we even have to train our own employees on spill prevention and things like that. So part of that is we have to review all of the SWPPP plans that are submitted to us, and then I'll speak for myself specifically, I'm the one that goes out on a monthly basis to check the sites. So I do get to see firsthand what these stormwater pollution prevention plans are actually doing in real life. All right, so, and then in the long run, after a project is built, we're the ones that generally are maintaining that infrastructure. So we also get to see how much sediment ended up in those downstream pipes and in those creeks. How did the pipes handle all of the things that were thrown at them? And are they gonna last long term? Because the taxpayers are the ones that are gonna have to pay for those improvements if it didn't work out right. No one wants to see our cities, townships, and neighborhoods negatively impacted by development. No one's gonna say they wanna see that, right? So we're all kinda on the same team here. Engineers are trying to put together the best possible plans, and the reviewers are there to make sure that that happens. All right. All of these standards are in place for a reason, and that's human and environmental health and safety. So in terms of plan submittal and review timeframes, the goal is always like, let's get these plans approved, right? Let's get the construction going, let's get our buildings built, let's move forward. But if we don't start at the very beginning with drainage, and we don't know where the water on the site is going, we're gonna have not a bad day, not a bad week, not a bad month. We're gonna have bad years. So that should be the #1 consideration. Ponds and drainage structures should never be an afterthought. I always recommend to any engineers that I work with, give me a call if you have a project that is in my area. I'll talk through it with you and see, I might have some information about your site that I can help when you're putting your design together. And I'm not gonna, design it for you. That's what the engineer's job is. Like I said, I'm not an engineer, but I am totally happy to help. Since I'll be the one reviewing your plans or the other folks in this room, we wanna help you put together what we need to see for it to be approved. All right, so we have multiple jurisdictions represented in this room. TMACOG area covers Lucas County, Wood County, Ottawa, maybe even a little bit of Fulton at some points. Sandusky as well, thank you, Kari. And the whole goal of a lot of the things that the Stormwater Action Group tries to do is make our requirements as consistent as possible, because it is easier for everyone. If we're doing the same things, then it's easier for plans to be submitted in the same way. Saves everybody time. But we do all have our own individual requirements. It's impossible to make everything standardized. For example, Lucas County has a lot of different soil types that Wood County doesn't. Wood County used to be the Great Black Swamp, right? So we have a lot of heavy soils, a lot of C and D soils. You can't really do as many infiltration practices as easily as you could, say, on the western side of Lucas County, where there's a lot of sand. It used to be a beach back in the day, right? So because of that, we do have different requirements. In Lucas County, I believe it's a 25-year volume requirement for flood control. In Wood County, Kevin and I have a 100-year requirement because we don't have as much infiltration in our soil, so we have to detain more. And the 200-year, Kevin, is that Northwood?
I believe, Dave?
Yes, it's normal.
Yeah. So, gotta throw that wrench in there, right? So there are reasons for all of these requirements, but they are a little different, so make sure you pay attention to who you're submitting your plans to. I've had plans before that don't even have the right municipality name written on them, and I totally get it. Cut and paste stuff. Use the things that you can to make it go a little faster, but you know, just some things are different. Disturbance thresholds. Usually for water quality, we're looking at an acre unless it's a greater common plan of development, right? Like subdivisions and commercial shopping malls that maybe are considered one site. It's a little lower for that. And overall, any construction project, if you're disturbing the ground and there's a chance that your site's gonna run off, you know, you're still gonna wanna protect your storm drains. You're gonna wanna have some perimeter controls. You might still have to do some kind of detention requirements that are separate from water quality, right? So you gotta really think about all these things, and those thresholds can be different. So for most of us, it's 1 acre. Kevin likes to be special. Just kidding, Kevin. And he has a half-acre threshold. But I can say the reason that Kevin went to that half-acre threshold was to make sure he could encompass more projects, right? He likes doing a lot of work, I guess. No, I'm just kidding.
I like being very busy.
He likes being very busy. But you know, when we get a set of plans and it has 0.995 as the disturbance acreage, come on guys, we know what's up, we get it. The EPA requirements are tough to meet sometimes, they're more expensive. You know, there are other things with them. But you know, there was a boat, we know what's going on, okay? And I'll take it back even further. City of Toledo has a disturbance threshold of 2,500 square feet. Is that correct? Yeah. So pay attention to where you're submitting and what their requirements are. So what do we want to see in a complete submittal to get those plans approved? The cover sheets and checklists. A lot of the jurisdictions around here have adopted the Ohio EPA checklist, so if there's updates to that, that's cool, great. It works as is, but you know, all tools can be improved. So we want to see some basic cover sheet and information. We obviously need a stormwater pollution prevention plan. It's a living document. There are changes that are made to it in the field, so having those modification logs and those general forms in there. Those don't usually change, just throw them in there. Don't overwhelm us with information and throw everything but the kitchen sink in there just to make sure it gets approved. I know I personally will go through and I'll check whole sections off if it's not necessary, because no one's going to read your SWP plan if it's this thick. Would you? I wouldn't. Let's be honest. You want to put the pertinent information in there. So construction sequence, Justin did a really good job explaining what we want to see with that. But there are certain things in your SWP plan that can be standardized, and there are certain things that need to be customized. And I know I like to spend most of my review time on the customizable things. Your construction sequence, where you're putting your silt fence, where you're putting your inlet protection, the sediment pond, the calculations for the said pond, and the post-construction practice. Those types of things that are changing from site to site. I don't waste a lot of time checking out the time frames for seeding, because in general, that's the same. I can look at it quickly and make sure. Sometimes there are changes, but they're usually called out. So detailed drawings are important. I have heard engineers say before, we're gonna let them decide that in the field. Sometimes that's justifiable, and other times, let's not have the contractor figure it out. Let's tell them what they're supposed to do, and we can always change it later. But detailed drawings can also be stock sometimes, your silt fence, your filter sock, construction entrances. I have somehow become famous at the construction supply companies for requiring drop-in style inlet protection in paved areas. They all know now that that's what I asked for, but I have a reason for it, right? If you put a dandy bag in the middle of a roadway, dandy bags are meant to pool water, right? So the very first thing someone's gonna do as soon as that water pools is they're either gonna punch a hole in it or they're gonna take it off. Or the road floods out and then we get calls about the road flooding. So, put those things in the plan if you can. Those drop-in style inlet protections are great. They have an overflow on them so that we don't flood out the road, but we still provide protection to the inlet. And if you can put in the SWP plan, this type of inlet protection will be on this drain, this type will be on this, it eliminates a lot of those questions. Once MS4s show up on site and are talking to the contractors, say, just do what's in the plan, right? Right. Obviously, we also have stock language, the do's and don'ts, open burning, those types of things that are all on the checklist. You know, just make sure the wording's in there. But then also a post-construction maintenance agreement. I'm gonna talk a little more about these later, but keep that in the back of your mind. We also wanna see the plan set pages. We don't just want the book. We would like for some of the pages to be included in the book so it's a comprehensive document, but the big set is a lot easier to look at. And then calculation spreadsheets. We don't have nearly enough time in this training. This could 100% be its own training to go over these things. But at minimum, the things that I would like to see are, what's your flood control structure? Are you doing a wet pond? Are you going to use that wet pond also to meet your water quality requirements? Does it have enough volume? Does it draw down at the appropriate time frames? Those spreadsheets are all out there, including the sediment basin calculation spreadsheet that Justin was talking about and skimmer size and calcs. If you use those standardized documents, especially the ones that are provided by Ohio Epa, those are the ones I use to review. I have them myself. If I don't have to go into a different style form to pull different information out and I can compare apples to apples, cuts the time down dramatically. I also have an example on the right-hand side there. That's a detention spreadsheet, and those are probably going to be different amongst jurisdictions. But the one on the left, that's the actual water quality spreadsheet, and that's the one I'm talking about being standardized. Okay, so those post-construction maintenance agreements. We could also do a whole training on these, okay? But who here has ever put together a post-construction maintenance agreement? Show of hands. 4 people? Come on, guys. Is that true? Okay, all right, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. A post-construction maintenance agreement. So obviously on a construction site, we have during construction erosion and sediment controls. And then we also have a post-construction control, potentially more than one, depends what the site's like. But that post-construction control is what stays on the site into perpetuity, whatever word you want to use, and it's managing the water quality once construction's over. Say it's a subdivision, maybe it's a pond, in a commercial area, maybe it's one of those underground detention systems, right? But that's there long-term. And we have to make sure if something is there long-term that it's taken care of. If we don't maintain those systems, they're not gonna work appropriately. And then what was the point of spending all that money installing them, right? We have to take care of them. And the main way to do that, because the maintenance of those things usually ends up on the owner. The owner, say it's a gas station, maybe a gas station owner, say it's a subdivision, probably is gonna end up in the hands of the homeowners association, if it even exists. Well, another can of worms. But you have to think about who your client is for this. And are they gonna understand this maintenance document that you're giving them? Because what you're gonna wanna put on there is the information about the structure. Think of it like an owner's manual. How do you change the batteries on it? What do you do if the light's blinking, right? Obviously we don't see that on a pond, but if there isn't a book to go along with it, they don't know what to do. They're like, hey, my site's flooding out, now what? They usually call us when things like that happen because they're not experts in this field like we are. So make this plan based on who you know is going to read it. Landscapers and plumbers. Are they gonna understand what you're putting down? You don't necessarily need to put the calculations in there, but the orifice sizes for the outlet structure, what are the elevations supposed to be in your forebay and your micro pool, if those need to be dipped out? You know, the pertinent information, and usually you can take the plan set sheet that you have all that info, where you have your detailed drawings of your pond or your structure. You can use that for this agreement. A lot of us have templates for what we want that agreement to look like, where you can plug your information in. But yeah, 100%, please make it understandable. We can try and help the folks, but the goal is for them to be able to maintain their own property on their own. All right. Yes, so if you see in these pictures, obviously the top picture, we're cleaning out a catch basin. That might be part of the maintenance if there's some pre-treatment on that structure. And the bottom picture is the dredging of a pond. So dredging is very expensive, very, very expensive. If we can do maintenance activities so we don't have to drain a whole pond down and dig it out like that, your clients and customers will be very, very happy. And so will we, because the MS4 are the ones that have to enforce the maintenance of these structures. And if I have to go to them and say, you have to spend $50,000 on this pond, are they gonna have that money? Probably not. All right. So this is a point that we wanted to touch on. This is something that I've been putting in all of my plan review comments, is do not file for a notice of intent with Ohio EPA until your plans are approved by the MS4. Who here has filed for an NOI before? Okay. So you go on the Ohio EPA eBiz website and you put all your info in about your site and you're getting ready to submit it because you want to start construction, and you can't start construction without an NOI. You have to have permit coverage or else you're going to be in a bigger problem, right? So you're doing the right thing, you're filing for your permit coverage. And at the end of that, there's a certification statement where you're saying that you've received local approval on your plans. Because Ohio EPA doesn't review your SWPPP plan just because you file for an NOI. That's been delegated to us. We're the ones that have to do that. So if you say that, yes, we've approved your plans and you filed for your NOI and you haven't, I asked our law director yesterday what the word for that was. And she said, oh, that's fraud. I was like, oh, okay. That sounds pretty cool. I'll touch a little bit on subdivisions, individual lot NOIs. Not a lot of people file for those. Some people do. So say the developer of the subdivision sells the lots off and they don't want to be responsible for what happens on that lot anymore. The individual lot files their own NOI, takes the responsibility off the developer. I know this sounds bad, but I don't really care if you guys do that or not, or make them do that, because if they don't, I'm just gonna go back to the developer and make them do it. As long as I have somebody to enforce on for when things aren't done. So, anywho, but you should put that information in there so they know it's an option. And then notice of termination. If you have started the NOI for your client as an engineer, you're not supposed to pin it for them or sign it. They're supposed to do it themselves as the permittee. But make sure you put the information in there. Maybe remind them if you know the project's done that they file an NOT so they're not on the books anymore.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
Just, I don't know if Lucas County's here, but just as a general comment, we've been asked before for the permit number when we submit our SWIP plan to Lucas County for approval.
Mhm.
But we can't get that until we get the approval, so it's like which one comes first.
All right, so good timing, because here I have some new cover sheet forms and resources that we've created through TMACOG. These forms originally had information on them where we were asking you for your notice of intent, your permit number through Ohio EPA, and obviously you don't have that yet, so we've removed that from these forms. These are our new cover sheets. That should eliminate that issue. I ask because we hold a pre-construction meeting for projects that the NOI be brought, the permit information be brought to the pre-construction meeting so that I can have it then. But just make sure you do, because if you show up to the pre-con meeting and you haven't filed for your NOI, I'm like, ooh, right. Ooh. Let's see, is this linked? No. Uh-oh. All right. Does this have the internet on it?
It does not.
Okay, just kidding, I can't go there anyway. Okay, so these are the two forms. There used to be 3 forms here. We consolidated 2 into the one that's on the left. So that's just one cover sheet that all of the jurisdictions that have adopted this. Is it in packets on the tables or was it in the, okay. So if you guys see that in your packets, that's the form that we would expect to be submitted. That gives us just the general information about the site. We have on there who the contact info is, what the acreage is, and then we have a checklist down there towards the bottom with what should be submitted when. So I'll let you guys take a look at that for a minute while I'm talking and let me know if you have any questions. The other form here is the contractor contact sheet. So whether or not a co-permittee is filed on a project, we still want to know who's working out there. I can't tell you how many inspections I've gone out on where it's a lot of this when something goes wrong. I don't have contact info for all of these people. That's pretty much what that form is for. So we know who to get a hold of when there is a problem. And if we have any questions. In the middle there, I have a screenshot from the website that I can't visit right now because so this links to the TMACOG website, and I know at least the city of Perrysburg, our website links to this as well. And it's just a little list of what the required documents are with some links to get to them. And that includes the Ohio EPA spreadsheets on the Ohio EPA website, these forms. Sorry, I can't see. It talks about, the post-construction maintenance agreements, and then a copy of your storm drainage sediment settling pond, post-construction stormwater quality calculations. Thanks. And it also has a link on the website for the Ohio EPA SWIP checklist. So my biggest recommendation is if you're a new plan reviewer, this is a new thing to you, use the SWIP checklist. It might not be the best thing in the world, but it's a good start. And if you do all the things that are on that checklist, you're probably gonna have a complete submittal. Okay. Any questions? Anybody find anything wrong on the forms? So we can fix them? Huh?
Don't say that.
He worked really hard on editing these, but still, you got anything? Okay. Once, twice.